Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Hit the bell for new stories. It was supposed to be just another routine research trip, one that involved studying alien species in an uncharted sector of the galaxy. Commander Naomi Pierce of the USS Horizon had led the Earth expedition with a sense of unwavering professionalism, confident in her ability to navigate the complexities of interstellar diplomacy. But the moment the ship entered the atmosphere of the planet Eterran 5, everything changed. The Eterran people, a race of highly intelligent humanoid beings, had sent a message of peace, an invitation to Earth's leaders to come and explore their world. The brief was clear, a welcome exchange of knowledge. Commander Pierce and her crew were the first humans to step foot on the lush, verdant world. As they disembarked, Naomi noticed something curious. The Eterrans awaiting them at the landing site appeared entirely nude. No uniforms, no armor, no garments of any kind. The Earthlings felt the heat of awkwardness immediately. Naomi's military discipline kicked in, and she forced herself to ignore the bizarre situation, focusing instead on the task at hand. The ambassador of the Eterrans, an individual named Yothar, stepped forward, his tall and lean figure standing proudly among his people. His skin shimmered under the planet's twin suns, with hues of green and silver, a color pattern unique to their species. "Greetings, Earthlings. We are honored to meet you," Yothar said with a deep voice, rich in resonance and conviction. Despite the apparent discomfort of her crew, Naomi maintained her composure. She offered a polite nod and extended her hand for a handshake, trying to ignore the overwhelming strangeness of the situation. "What brings you to our world?" Yothar inquired, his large, almond-shaped eyes studying the humans intently. "We come to learn and share," Naomi replied, her tone professional, though internally she struggled with the alien custom that was not only unfamiliar but deeply unsettling. The lack of clothing was not merely a cultural curiosity, it was something much more. To the Eterrans it was a sign of freedom, a rejection of the societal structures that Earthlings clung to. The Earthlings, in contrast, wore their uniforms with pride. Their clothes weren't just protection from the harsh environments of space. They symbolized their connection to civilization, to order, and to tradition. The concept of shedding those garments in the presence of others was so alien that Naomi could scarcely process it. As they toured the city of Lativer, the largest metropolis on the planet, Naomi's mind wandered, trying to make sense of the situation. Eterrans weren't just clothes free out of casual comfort. Their entire way of life was built around a concept of body autonomy, where the physical form was seen as a vessel of pure individuality, not to be hidden or concealed. To them, clothing was unnecessary, even a symbol of the oppression they had long escaped. Yet, for Naomi and her crew, the idea of walking amongst these beings without the shield of fabric was intimidating. She could see it in the way her team members shifted uncomfortably. Even the hardened soldiers of the crew struggled to maintain their stoic faces as they passed by naked Eterran children playing in the streets, their laughter echoing in the air. It felt like an invasion of their deepest privacy, something they had never experienced before. There was a sharp divide between cultures, a fundamental misunderstanding of what modesty truly meant. The crew was assigned quarters within a magnificent palace-like structure made of iridescent stone. The architecture was sleek and elegant, with wide windows that offered views of rolling green fields and tranquil rivers, but it was the lack of walls between rooms that unsettled the humans. The Eterrans had no need for privacy in the traditional sense. All areas were open, transparent, and shared. The idea of a room without walls was incomprehensible to Earthlings, whose need for privacy and personal space was so deeply ingrained in their psyche. It wasn't just the lack of clothing that perplexed Naomi, it was the inherent freedom it represented. The Eterrans seemed liberated from the societal expectations that burdened human life. Their nakedness wasn't sexual or crude, it was natural, even sacred. Naomi spent hours reflecting on the profound difference between the Eterran way of life and human society. She realized that this cultural divide would present a challenge in the diplomatic negotiations. How could they bridge such a vast gap in understanding? Would humanity even be willing to accept such an alien lifestyle, or would they dismiss the Eterrans' ways as primitive? As the sun set on the alien landscape, Naomi sat by the edge of a crystal-clear pond, gazing at her reflection in the water. She was alone, and for the first time since landing she allowed herself to consider what it might mean for her crew, her people, and the future of humanity. Could Earth truly accept this level of freedom? Was humanity ready to discard the centuries of clothing, modesty, and identity built on fabric and material? As she pondered these questions, a voice interrupted her thoughts. Yothar stood beside her, a soft smile on his face. "Do you find our customs Difficult to understand, Commander Pierce? Naomi glanced up at the Eterran ambassador, meeting his gaze. It's a bit overwhelming, she admitted, though she was careful to keep her tone neutral. But I'm trying to understand. Yothar nodded. Understand this, Commander. We are not ashamed of our bodies and we are not ashamed of our freedom. You are welcome to stay with us, to learn and to accept that we are different from you. But I ask you to consider something. What if the fabric you wear is not just an item of clothing but a prison? The words hung in the air, and Naomi felt a flicker of something deep inside. A curiosity that would evolve into a greater understanding of not just the Eterrans but of humanity itself. The days that followed Naomi Pierce's first encounter with the Eterrans were a whirlwind of cultural exchange. Despite the discomfort her crew felt, they dutifully participated in discussions and ceremonies, carefully navigating the deep divide between the two civilizations. Each day, Naomi tried to process the weight of their reality, the stark contrast between human values and Eterran customs, especially the absence of clothing. Naomi could not shake the feeling of being out of place. She caught herself glancing at the Eterrans' bare bodies again and again, as if trying to discover some hidden meaning behind their customs. In truth, she was still struggling to fully comprehend their views. How could they exist so freely, without the societal structures humanity had relied on for millennia? The thought gnawed at her as she roamed the stunning alien city, Lativer, surrounded by nature and culture so different from Earth's. Yothar had been kind, if cryptic, in his words during their first conversation. His remarks about clothing being a prison made her question the very foundation of human society. What did their clothes represent? Was it a shield against vulnerability, or an armor of societal conformity? These questions dug deeper into Naomi's mind with every passing hour. It was an internal struggle she hadn't anticipated. On the third day of the diplomatic exchange, the crew was invited to attend a ceremonial event. It was a grand celebration to honor the unity between their species, and Naomi knew this was an opportunity to understand the Eterran way of life even further. The ceremony took place in a massive amphitheater, open to the skies, surrounded by fields of golden grass and clear, flowing streams. The sight was mesmerizing, the natural beauty of the planet melding seamlessly with the architecture of the Eterran culture. Naomi stood beside her crew trying to keep her thoughts focused on the mission, but it was hard. The Eterrans' complete lack of clothing had made her increasingly uncomfortable. They were unfazed by the Earthlings' awkwardness, their postures relaxed, their movements flowing with an ease that Naomi couldn't quite replicate. Yothar, standing tall at the front, began to address the assembly. His deep, melodic voice carried through the amphitheater, and the crowd of Eterrans responded in unison, a chorus of affirmation. Naomi felt a pang of jealousy. There was an unwavering certainty in their voices that her people lacked. On Earth, there was always something to prove, always something to hide. Yet here, in this alien society, everything seemed open and accepted. The Eterrans spoke of unity, of personal freedom, and the interconnectedness of all beings. But the words didn't just resonate with Naomi, they shook her. What if humanity was wrong? What if the very notion of needing clothes and structures to define our identities was holding them back from true freedom? The ceremony continued with a display of physical artistry. Eterran dancers, their bodies lithe and graceful, performed in a way that seemed almost otherworldly. Their movements were fluid, as if they were not bound by the constraints of gravity, their bare bodies moving in perfect harmony with nature. Naomi watched in awe, trying to suppress the tension building inside her. There was something so raw and unfiltered about the performance. It was as if the dancers were communicating with the very essence of the planet itself, their bodies becoming a language of movement and spirit. The thought struck her. These beings didn't need clothes to express themselves. They didn't need any external signifiers of status, power, or authority. Their very presence, their bodies, their movements were enough. How liberating that must be. Naomi couldn't help but wonder if Earthlings were missing something profound, something that had been buried under centuries of social constructs and materialism. After the ceremony, as the crowd dispersed, Yothar approached Naomi. His eyes were piercing, but there was a warmth to them that made Naomi feel both comforted and exposed at the same time. "You see it now, don't you?" he asked, his voice soft but filled with an undercurrent of wisdom. Naomi swallowed. "I'm not sure I do," she admitted, struggling to articulate her thoughts. "I can see how free your people are. How connected to one another and to your world. But I don't know if I can fully understand it. On Earth, we've always relied on clothing to mark our place in society, to hide what's private and to protect ourselves. It's not just a custom. It's part of who we are." Yothar nodded as if expecting this answer. And that is what makes you different. On our world, we have come to understand that true freedom is in embracing the self, without the need for barriers. The body is not a commodity to be covered. It is an expression of individuality, of harmony with the universe. To hide it is to hide a part of who you are. Naomi pondered his words. In all her years of studying diplomacy and human psychology, she had never encountered a culture quite like this. The concept of self-expression through nakedness was something so foreign to her, yet there was a quiet logic to it. The more she thought about it, the more she felt as though Earth's obsession with clothing was a veil over the true nature of human connection. Yothar's voice brought her back from her thoughts. You and your crew are welcome to live among us for as long as you wish. We ask nothing from you but an open heart and an open mind. Come, let us show you more of our world. The invitation was tempting. Despite her unease, Naomi knew that this was an opportunity to understand something far deeper than political or diplomatic ties. It was an opportunity to glimpse the true essence of freedom. The question now was not whether they could learn from the Eterans, but whether humanity was ready for what they would discover. As the night fell over Lativer, Naomi stood alone on the balcony of the palace, gazing out over the endless fields. The stars above shone with an unfamiliar brilliance, and she felt small beneath their gaze. She was no longer sure of everything she thought she knew about her own species. How could Earth, a planet so consumed by its own complexities, ever come to terms with the simplicity of the Eteran way? The universe was vast, and in it, Naomi was beginning to see a new horizon. She knew this was only the beginning. The real question was whether she and her people could ever truly embrace the freedom that the Eterans had so effortlessly embodied. The days on Eteran 5 grew longer, and the strange customs of the planet became more difficult for Naomi to ignore. The initial discomfort she felt had turned into something deeper, a sense of awe mixed with uncertainty. Every corner of the planet seemed to remind her that her understanding of human identity, privacy, and freedom was limited, and the more she observed the Eterans, the more her sense of self began to shift. Naomi knew she was at a crossroads. She had come to the planet as a diplomat, tasked with forging a connection between two very different species. But as each day passed, it became harder to reconcile the deep cultural chasm between Earthlings and Eterans. Despite her growing fascination, there was a constant pressure weighing on her, an unease that she could neither deny nor fully understand. How could she, a human, reconcile her own upbringing with the raw openness of the Eterans? It wasn't just the absence of clothing that stood out to Naomi, it was the way the Eterans seemed to move through their world without shame. Every Eteran she encountered exuded a sense of comfort and ease, as if they were completely at home within their own skin. To them, their bodies were sacred, not to be hidden but to be expressed in all their natural form. No one was ashamed of who they were or how they looked. There was no judgment. There was only acceptance. Naomi's thoughts kept returning to that question Yothar had asked her on the balcony. What if the fabric you wear is not just an item of clothing but a prison? Could it be true? Was humanity's reliance on clothing and the values associated with it, preventing them from seeing a different way of living? One that might be more authentic, more free? It was late afternoon when Naomi found herself walking through the central park of Lativer. Her crew had gone off to meet with Eteran scientists to discuss the technical aspects of the alliance, but Naomi had taken some time for herself. The park, as always, was filled with Eterans in various stages of activity. Some were meditating, others were practicing martial arts, their bodies moving in flawless sync with the environment. And in the center of the park, children played in the open air, their laughter echoing through the trees. As she wandered, she couldn't help but notice the absence of any boundaries. There were no fences, no walls, no separations between the spaces where one activity ended and another began. It was as if the Eterans believed in the interconnectedness of all things. No division between work and rest, privacy and community. Even the smallest acts seemed profound. The way they ate, danced, rested, everything was a celebration of the body in the moment. But Naomi's mind was still grappling with the idea of clothing. On Earth, clothes were so much more than mere coverings. They were symbols of status, identity, and belonging. They represented protection from the elements, but also from one another. Clothing allowed people to maintain their privacy and their boundaries. But here, among the Eterans, the very idea of boundaries seemed alien. She paused beside a tranquil pond, the water still and clear. The Eterans who passed her nodded in greeting, their expressions serene. Naomi reflected on how much simpler their lives appeared, even though their society was so different from Earth's. There was no bureaucracy, no complex systems of governance, no caste or class divisions. There was only the shared understanding that all beings, no matter their form, had the right to live freely and without shame. She couldn't help but wonder, was this true freedom? Just then Yothar appeared beside her. He had an uncanny ability to find her at the moments when she was most deep in thought, as though he could sense the storm of questions raging inside her. "You look troubled, Commander," he said gently, his voice warm but filled with an undeniable depth of understanding. Naomi smiled, though it was tinged with uncertainty. "I'm trying to understand. I can see how your people live so openly, so comfortably, with no need for privacy or boundaries. But where do you draw the line? What keeps you from losing yourselves to chaos?" Yothar tilted his head as if considering her words carefully. "There is no line, Commander. No need for one. We are not afraid of the unknown or of each other. In fact, it is the absence of the walls you speak of that allows us to connect in ways you cannot imagine. Our connection to each other and to the land is deep and unspoken. It is not about control but about harmony. The body is just the vessel, but the spirit, the soul, is what binds us all together." Naomi felt a flicker of understanding. "But what about the dangers? What happens if someone abuses that openness? If there's no guard against dishonesty or harm?" "Your concern is understandable," Yothar said softly. "But our society operates on mutual respect and understanding. The greatest crime is not the absence of clothing, it is the lack of empathy. When we harm one another, we harm ourselves. It is an unspoken truth that runs through our veins. We have learned through generations that our bodies and souls are connected, and to hurt another is to hurt ourselves." Naomi was silent for a long moment, mulling over his words. There was a simplicity to them, an honesty that resonated deeply within her. But there was also a fear of what such openness might cost. On Earth, people wore clothes not just for warmth or protection, but as a shield against vulnerability. The idea of living without such a shield felt dangerous, terrifying even. "You speak of empathy," Naomi said, her voice thoughtful. "But that's a value we share too. Humanity has its flaws, but we know how to care for one another. We fight to protect each other. So, why does it feel like there's so much at stake here? What if we lose something by shedding the layers we've built over the years?" Yothar's eyes softened. "What if, Commander, you are gaining something instead?" Naomi's heart skipped a beat. The question lingered in the air like a challenge, and she wasn't sure whether she was ready to answer it. Was she ready to shed the layers, both physical and metaphorical, that had shaped her entire existence? Over the next few days, Naomi continued to wrestle with her thoughts. Her mission, initially meant to bridge the gap between two worlds, was now beginning to feel more personal. The diplomatic talks went smoothly, but Naomi could not escape the quiet transformation happening within her. She had come to Terran 5 to learn about an alien species, but in truth she was learning about herself. And for the first time she felt the stirrings of something new, something that would change her life forever. As the sun set over the endless fields of Lativer, Naomi stood once more on the balcony, looking out over the horizon. She felt the weight of her past decisions but also a glimmer of something else. An acceptance that maybe, just maybe, true freedom didn't come with clothes, barriers, or shields. Maybe it came from within. The days passed on Terran 5, each one blurring into the next in a haze of contemplation and discovery. Naomi Pierce's days of formal diplomacy with the Terrans were nearly over, and the crew's mission was nearly complete. Yet, as her final day approached, she felt an unease she could not shake, a sense of unfinished business, of something fundamental she had yet to confront. The strange, almost mystical freedom the Terrans had cultivated had begun to wear away at the walls Naomi had so carefully constructed around herself. She found herself questioning not just their culture but her own. The questions had become a gnawing presence in the back of her mind, refusing to be ignored. What was she afraid of? What would it mean to embrace the openness the Terrans so effortlessly embodied? It wasn't just the absence of clothing that had unsettled her. The absence of barriers, of shields, of societal masks. They had changed the way she saw the world. The Terrans were unafraid to be seen, to exist without the need for validation from others. They didn't hide behind uniforms or social roles. Their worth wasn't determined by titles or achievements. They simply were. Naomi had seen this on the day she and her crew had been taken to the Terran riverbank for a traditional ritual, an event in which each participant was asked to immerse themselves in the water as a symbol of renewal. It was a simple act, but as she stood on the edge of the river, watching the Terrans wade into the clear, cool waters without hesitation, she felt a deep, almost primal sense of vulnerability. She was an outsider, clothed in her uniform, her identity still wrapped up in the layers of what it meant to be human. Her uniform was her shield, her armor, and without it, she feared losing herself. She had come to understand that the Eterans saw their bodies as a direct reflection of their souls, pure, unencumbered by shame, free of judgment. Their bodies were not something to hide, but to celebrate. To Naomi, this had seemed impossible to reconcile with human nature, yet she could not deny the pull she felt, the whispering call to embrace that same freedom. Yothar had spoken to her often in the last few days, guiding her with words that seemed to peel back the layers of her old beliefs. They had spoken of many things, of their people's long history, their connection to the land, and their belief that the body was not just a vessel for the soul but an active participant in the soul's expression. But now Yothar had become more insistent. He had seen the inner conflict within her, sensed the shift taking place, and he was determined to help her cross the threshold. "Commander," Yothar said one evening as the two stood together overlooking the great fields of Lativar. The sky was painted in shades of purple and gold as the twin suns set, casting the landscape in a soft, ethereal light. "You are at a crossroads. I can feel it. You are close to understanding, but there is one more step you must take." Naomi turned to him, a question in her eyes. She had grown accustomed to their conversations, though they often left her with more questions than answers. "What do you mean, Yothar? What step?" Yothar's gaze was steady and patient. "You cannot truly understand freedom until you let go of your fear. You cannot embrace your soul until you allow it to be seen in its truest form. You are bound by the cloth of earth. That is your prison just as it was ours once." Naomi clenched her fists at her sides. His words cut deeper than she had anticipated. She had never thought of her uniform, her status as a commander, as a prison. It was part of who she was, part of her identity. Yet, in that moment, Yothar's words felt like a mirror held up to her soul. "I don't know if I can do it," she admitted quietly, her voice tinged with uncertainty. "I don't know how to shed everything I've built, everything I've known." Yothar nodded, his expression softening. "You do not have to shed everything, Naomi. You are not abandoning who you are but freeing yourself from the need to hide. Let go of the fear of judgment. Let go of the weight of shame. You are not defined by the fabric you wear or the roles you play. You are defined by your spirit." For the first time since arriving on Eteran 5, Naomi truly felt the weight of what Yothar was saying. She had always thought of herself in terms of her role: commander, leader, protector. These were titles she had worked for, titles that had been hard-earned. But now, standing in the presence of Yothar, she realized that these labels had also confined her. They had separated her from the raw, unfiltered version of herself, the version that existed beneath the uniform, beneath the identity. She was beginning to see what the Eterans had known for centuries. The body was not a mere tool, it was a canvas. It could be adorned with nothing more than the truth of who one was. Naomi had always worn her uniform to protect herself, to hold herself together. But was that truly living? That night, Naomi couldn't sleep. She wandered the palace gardens alone, her mind racing. The air was cool and the sounds of the alien night creatures filled the silence. The weight of her internal battle pressed down on her chest. She could feel the truth of Yothar's words seeping into her consciousness. But the fear was still there, lurking beneath the surface. She found herself standing at the edge of the river once more. The moonlight danced across the water, casting shimmering reflections on the surface. Naomi stared into the depths, unsure of what she was searching for. But as she gazed into the calm, still water, she realized that she was searching for something deeper than answers. She was searching for herself. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. What was she afraid of? If she let go of her uniform, her title, her sense of control, what would remain? The river, in its stillness, seemed to offer an answer. The water was not afraid to flow, to move without hesitation, to embrace the unknown. There was no fear in its journey, no shame in its form. It simply existed as it was, free and untethered. Naomi exhaled, feeling a wave of clarity wash over her. Maybe it was time to let go. Not just of her uniform but of the need to control every aspect of her life. To embrace her humanity in its purest form. In that moment, Naomi made a decision. She would shed the weight of her old identity. She would step into the unknown, allowing herself to be seen, to be vulnerable. It would not be easy. It would be the hardest thing she had ever done. But as the cool river water lapped at the shore before her, she knew it was the only way forward. The Eterans had taught her a profound truth. True freedom was not found in control or in hiding behind shields. It was found in embracing the fullness of who she was, body, mind, and soul, without shame. With that realization, Naomi stepped forward, her first step into the unknown, towards the freedom she had always been too afraid to reach for. The morning after her decision, Naomi stood at the threshold of the Ateran ritual grounds, her pulse racing in her chest. Today was the day she had chosen to take the final step, to cast aside her earthly boundaries, her fear, and her uniform. It felt like a moment of irreversible change, and yet she had never felt more certain. In the past days she had thought often of the river, of the stillness and the freedom it represented. She had seen in it what she had always been too afraid to acknowledge in herself, the potential for unencumbered existence. As the sun rose over Lativer, casting a golden glow over the vast fields and the tranquil waters, Naomi realized she was no longer the person who had arrived on this planet weeks ago. The conflict, the hesitation, and the doubt were still there, but they no longer held the same power over her. She had come to see that humanity's strength wasn't in the layers they had built, but in their vulnerability, in the ability to embrace what was beneath the surface. Yothar had been waiting for her by the river's edge, as calm and poised as ever. His presence, always unwavering, seemed to offer her reassurance, like a silent anchor in a world that was shifting beneath her feet. He nodded toward the flowing waters, his gaze soft but knowing. "You have made your choice," he said. His voice was as gentle as the breeze that stirred the tall grasses around them. Naomi took a deep breath. She had known, from the moment she made the decision, that it would not be easy. The journey to self-acceptance was never simple, and the cultural weight of her own identity would not disappear overnight. But this moment, standing on the edge of the river, felt like the first time she had truly chosen herself over the roles that had defined her. "I have," she replied quietly. "But I don't know what comes after this." Yothar smiled, the expression a mix of wisdom and compassion. "You may never know what comes after. But you will know what you are in this moment. And that is enough." There was a profound silence between them, as if the very air held its breath. Naomi felt her nerves flare, but she also felt a sense of calm. There was no turning back, and in that uncertainty lay the essence of what freedom truly was. She began to unfasten the buttons of her uniform. Each one came undone with a deliberate motion, as though she were peeling away a skin that no longer belonged to her. The fabric, which had once been a source of comfort and protection, felt suffocating now. With every layer she removed, she felt lighter, freer. It was not the physical act of undressing that brought her the release, it was the emotional and mental unraveling. Her uniform had been her shield, her armor. It had defined her in so many ways, as a commander, a leader, a protector. But now, with each piece discarded, she was faced with the rawness of who she was underneath. She felt exposed, vulnerable, and yet for the first time, truly herself. Yothar remained silent, watching her closely but offering no judgment. His acceptance was a balm to Naomi's frayed nerves. There was no discomfort in his gaze, no hint of expectation, just a deep and unwavering patience. When Naomi finally stood before him, her body exposed to the open air for the first time in her life, she felt the weight of the moment settle around her. The soft breeze brushed against her bare skin, and for a moment she felt as though she were part of something far greater than herself. "You are beautiful," Yothar said, his voice as steady as before. But this time there was a subtle warmth in his tone. Naomi's heart skipped a beat at his words, but she didn't look away. There was no shame in his eyes, no judgment, only acceptance. The vulnerability she had feared, the self-consciousness she had carried her entire life, was no longer her burden to bear. "I'm not sure I feel beautiful," Naomi admitted, her voice quiet but earnest. "I feel exposed. Like I'm standing here without anything to hold me together." Yothar's smile deepened. "That is because you are standing with nothing but your soul. That is the truest form of beauty. You are not defined by the cloth you wear, or the titles you hold. You are defined by who you are in your most authentic form. In your openness there is power." Naomi closed her eyes, taking in his words. She felt a warmth spread through her chest. She had always equated power with control, with the ability to manipulate situations and people. But now she understood that true power was not in holding on to something, but in releasing it. Letting go of the masks and pretending and allowing herself to simply be. She opened her eyes to find the world around her alive with color, as if the very planet itself was in tune with her transformation. The river flowed peacefully beside them, its waters reflecting the sky above, undisturbed and free. For the first time, Naomi felt herself in harmony with her surroundings. The land, the air, the water, everything seemed to breathe with her. "I feel different," she murmured almost to herself. "It's like the world is suddenly clearer." Yothar nodded, his gaze intense. "When you shed the weight of your past, of the expectations and the labels, you allow yourself to see things as they truly are. You no longer need to hide behind barriers. You no longer need to prove anything. Naomi took a slow step forward toward the river. The water, smooth and inviting, beckoned her. She stepped in, feeling the coolness seep into her skin, grounding her. The moment her feet touched the riverbed, she felt a wave of connection, something deep and ancient, as though the earth itself was embracing her. The water flowed around her legs, the current gentle but steady. As she waded deeper, the act became a ritual of cleansing, of shedding the layers that had bound her. She had come to this place to understand freedom, and now she was finally beginning to feel it. The weight she had carried for so long, her identity as a commander, as a leader, as a person defined by her title, began to dissolve in the flowing waters. With each step, Naomi felt her old self fade away. The person she had been on Earth, the person defined by her roles and her fears, seemed to drift downstream, leaving her with a sense of lightness she had never known. She was simply Naomi, a being of flesh and spirit, with nothing to hide and nothing to prove. Yothar joined her at the water's edge, his presence silent but deeply supportive. He did not need to say anything. In that moment, Naomi knew she had crossed a threshold. She was no longer the person who had arrived on Eteran 5, unsure of herself and bound by the expectations of her past. She was something new, someone who had discovered the freedom to exist without limits. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting its final rays over the river, Naomi stood tall, her feet planted firmly in the water. She felt a quiet strength emanating from within. This was just the beginning. The river had not only washed away her fear, it had revealed her true self. And for the first time, Naomi was ready to embrace whatever came next. In the days that followed Naomi's immersion in the river, she felt herself both lighter and more grounded than she had ever been. The shift had not been instantaneous. The ripples of her transformation had extended far beyond the moment she had stepped into the water. There were still moments of doubt, fleeting flashes of the old Naomi, clad in her uniform, defined by her titles and the expectations of her people. But those moments were fewer now, and each passing day she felt herself shedding more of the past, more of the need for validation, and more of the burdens she had carried for so long. Yet, as the days passed, Naomi also began to sense something more unsettling beneath the surface of her transformation. The deeper she allowed herself to embrace this new reality, the more she realized that it wasn't just her external world that had shifted. It was her perception of what it meant to be human, to be herself. The Eterans had spoken of harmony, of living in alignment with their bodies, minds, and souls. It had all sounded so simple, so natural, yet Naomi was beginning to see how complex this harmony truly was. The more she embraced this openness, the more she realized how much her former identity had been tied to the intricate web of societal constructs she had left behind. She had shed her clothes, her rank, her mask. But now she was confronted with the vulnerability of existing as an individual stripped of the very foundations she had once relied on. She had thought her liberation would be a moment of complete clarity, a sudden realization of what it meant to truly be free. But now, with the weight of her new existence upon her, she found herself grappling with questions that went deeper than her outward transformation. Who was she without the roles she had played? Without the expectations that had guided her every decision? She found herself at a crossroads once more, and this time it wasn't a physical one, but an internal one. Could she truly embrace the unknown without losing herself in the process? One morning, after a restless night spent thinking, Naomi made her way to the same riverbank where she had undergone her transformation. The air was cool and crisp, the sky a pale blue as the twin suns of Eteran 5 began their slow ascent. As she stood there, looking out over the water, she couldn't help but feel the weight of everything she had let go. Yothar appeared beside her, as he always did when her thoughts grew heavy. His presence was a silent support, a steadying force that she had come to rely on in her more uncertain moments. "You are troubled again," he said quietly, his voice soft but perceptive. Naomi nodded, unsure of how to voice the depth of what she was feeling. "I thought this would be easier. I thought shedding everything would make me feel whole. But it's harder than I expected. I feel like I've lost something, like I've let go of more than I was ready to." Yothar didn't reply immediately. Instead, he regarded her with a steady, knowing gaze. There was no judgment in his eyes, only understanding. "It is not unusual to feel such unease when one lets go of a lifetime's worth of beliefs," Yothar said after a pause. "Your society has taught you that identity is something that must be fixed, defined by your roles and your titles. But freedom, Naomi, is not found in the absence of those things. It is found in the willingness to remain open, to allow change without resistance. Your true self is not something that can be defined or boxed in. It is something that constantly evolves, as fluid and ever-changing as the river. Naomi's brow furrowed, but she understood the essence of what Yothar was saying. She had been so focused on the idea of freedom as a state of being that she had forgotten the truth of what freedom really was. Freedom wasn't about removing all constraints and never looking back. It was about embracing the fluidity of existence, the ever-evolving nature of the self. Do you mean to say that I'll never truly know who I am? Naomi asked, her voice tinged with uncertainty. Yothar's smile was soft, but there was a spark of something deeper in his eyes. You will never be the same person you were yesterday, Naomi. And that is the beauty of it. Each day, each moment, you are given the chance to redefine yourself. To choose again and again who you will be. Your humanity lies not in your certainty, but in your willingness to remain open to change. Naomi closed her eyes, allowing his words to wash over her like the river's gentle current. She had clung so tightly to the idea of a fixed identity, to the belief that she had to know exactly who she was in order to move forward. But what if she didn't need to have all the answers? What if the key to her freedom was not in the certainty of her self-identity, but in the ability to flow with the changes that came her way? The river, ever present and steady, seemed to whisper this truth to her. It didn't know where it would flow next. It didn't need to. It simply moved forward, accepting each twist and turn without resistance, allowing itself to be shaped by the terrain but never losing its essence. Naomi opened her eyes, the weight on her chest lifting just a little. I think I understand, she said softly. I've been fighting the change, trying to hold on to something that no longer serves me. But I don't have to have everything figured out, do I? Yothar's gaze softened. No, Naomi. You do not. You only need to be willing to walk forward, without fear of what lies ahead. As Naomi stood there beside the river, she felt a quiet peace settle over her. She was no longer searching for something concrete to hold on to. She no longer felt the need to define herself by the roles and expectations of her past. The world was wide and full of possibilities, and for the first time she felt the freedom to explore those possibilities without the pressure to have everything mapped out. It was then that Naomi understood the true nature of the transformation she had undergone. It wasn't about the shedding of clothes or titles. It wasn't even about casting aside the expectations of Earth. It was about shedding the fear of uncertainty. It was about stepping into the unknown without needing to control every outcome, to trust that the river of her life would carry her where she needed to go. And in that moment, Naomi felt truly free. Her gaze turned to the horizon, to the future that lay ahead, vast and undefined. She had no idea where it would take her, but she knew one thing for certain. She was ready for whatever came next. With a final glance at Yothar, Naomi stepped forward into the unknown. Each step felt lighter than the last, as if the very ground beneath her was guiding her. The path was unclear, but for the first time, Naomi didn't need to know. She was ready to let the current of her life take her wherever it would. Naomi walked along the riverbank, the morning sun filtering through the trees, casting dappled shadows on the ground. It had been several weeks since she had made her choice, since she had stepped into the unknown and allowed herself to be reborn in ways she had never anticipated. The questions, the doubts, and the fear had all but dissipated. In their place was a quiet confidence, a new understanding of what it meant to be human, to be herself. The days on Iteran 5 had changed her, transformed her into something not bound by the rigid structures she had once held dear. The Iterans had shown her the power of vulnerability, the strength that came from releasing control, from shedding the layers of identity that had once defined her. She had embraced that freedom, but she knew that true change could not come from simply shedding old habits. It had to come from within. And as she stood there now, looking out at the river, she understood that her journey was far from over. The river had been a symbol of change, of the flow of life, but it was more than that. It had been her teacher. Each moment spent by its banks, each time she stepped into its waters, had been an invitation to let go of the need to control, to stop resisting what was. Now she could feel the rhythm of the river within her, a steady pulse that mirrored the flow of her own thoughts, her own heart. Her transformation had not been immediate, nor had it been painless. There were still moments when old habits, old ways of thinking crept in, when she found herself wanting to retreat into the comfort of certainty. But each time the river called her back, reminding her that she didn't need to have all the answers, didn't need to control everything in her life. The freedom to be, to exist without pretense, without barriers, had become her new reality. Naomi felt a hand on her shoulder and turned to find Yothar beside her, his face calm and knowing as always. He had been with her through this entire journey, offering his quiet guidance when needed and his steady presence when her doubts had seemed insurmountable. He had seen her at her most vulnerable, and he had never faltered in his belief that she would come to understand the deeper truths of her existence. "Are you ready?" Yothar asked softly, his gaze fixed on her. Naomi's heart skipped a beat, but she didn't hesitate. She had come a long way from the woman who had first arrived on Iteran 5, uncertain of herself and her place in the universe. "I think so," she said, her voice steady. "I feel at peace with what I've learned. But I don't know what comes next." Yothar smiled, the warmth in his expression a silent acknowledgement of the growth she had undergone. "That is the point, Naomi. You don't need to know. The future is not a destination. It is a journey. What matters is how you walk it, not where it leads." Naomi nodded, absorbing his words. The weight of the unknown no longer felt like an obstacle to her. It had become a part of the landscape, something to be embraced, not feared. She had realized that the journey was not about certainty, but about learning to be present with each step, trusting in the process, and surrendering to what life had to offer. The sound of footsteps behind them caught her attention, and she turned to see her crew members approaching. They had watched her transformation from afar, their curiosity and respect growing as Naomi had embraced the ways of the Iterans. They too had learned from her example. The rigid divisions that had once existed between them, between the humans and the Iterans, had begun to fade. There was an understanding now, a sense of shared experience. The cultural barriers that had initially seemed insurmountable were no longer a divide, but a bridge. Captain Singh, the leader of the human crew, approached Naomi with a thoughtful expression on his face. "You've changed," he said simply, his gaze flickering between Naomi and the serene landscape around them. Naomi met his eyes, the question hanging in the air. "Do you think it's for the better?" Singh didn't answer immediately. He seemed to consider the question deeply, as if weighing his words. "I don't know if it's for the better," he said at last. "But it's for the different. You've shown us something we didn't understand before. There's a strength in vulnerability, in accepting that we don't have to have everything figured out." Naomi felt a deep sense of gratitude towards Singh. He had seen her not just as a commander but as a person, someone struggling, evolving, and growing. His words were a reminder that even in their differences, the humans and the Iterans shared a common experience of learning and change. "You've always led by example," Yothar said, his voice calm and steady. "But now your leadership is rooted in something deeper. It is rooted in the understanding that true strength lies not in the ability to control, but in the willingness to surrender." Naomi turned her gaze to the river, watching as the water flowed endlessly forward. She could see now that her journey was not a singular experience. It was part of a greater flow, a movement of energy and growth that was constantly unfolding. She was part of something larger, and that realization filled her with a sense of peace. "I've learned a lot from you," Naomi said, turning back to Yothar. "From all of you. But I think I'm ready to take what I've learned back with me. It's time for the humans and the Iterans to learn from each other in a new way. To build something that is more than just a bridge between our cultures. Something that is built on this understanding." Yothar nodded, his expression serene but approving. "You're right. Your journey is not just your own. It is a part of the greater story. And in the end, it is the connections we make, the relationships we build, that will define the future." Naomi turned to her crew once more, her heart full of determination. She could sense that they too had undergone a transformation of their own. The walls that had once separated them were crumbling, and in their place something new was emerging. A deeper connection between two worlds, two peoples, bound together not by what separated them, but by the shared experience of growth, vulnerability, and mutual respect. As the Iterans and humans gathered together on the riverbank, Naomi felt a sense of unity that transcended everything she had once known. There were no titles, no ranks, no uniforms, just people standing side by side ready to embrace the future. For the first time in a long time, Naomi felt at home, not because of where she was, but because of who she had become. The journey was far from over, but as she stood with her crew and the Iterans, she felt a deep sense of gratitude. She had shed the old version of herself, but she had not lost who she truly was. She had simply found her way back to herself. And in that moment, Naomi understood that freedom wasn't just the absence of boundaries, it was the ability to grow, to change, to step into the unknown, and to trust that the journey would lead her where she was meant to go. With that understanding, Naomi took her first step forward into the future, ready for whatever came next. As the days unfolded, the unity that Naomi had hoped for began to manifest in ways both small and profound. The Iterans, once distant and enigmatic, had embraced the humans in a shared journey of growth, shedding their preconceived notions of what it meant to coexist. The barrier between the two species, once a chasm of misunderstanding and mistrust, had been bridged by the very transformation Naomi had undergone. Through the subtle power of vulnerability, they had discovered that they were not so different after all. Naomi stood at the helm of this new era, not as a commander or a leader in the traditional sense, but as a beacon of change, a symbol of the potential that lay in embracing uncertainty, in casting aside old identities to forge a new path. The Eterans had shown her how to live without the weight of rigid definitions, and she now had the unique privilege of passing on that lesson to her crew, guiding them not just as a leader, but as a partner, as a fellow traveler on this shared journey. Captain Singh, still reluctant to completely shed the role of human hierarchy, had warmed to this idea of leadership. His crew, once bound by the strict structures of military discipline, were beginning to take on the philosophy of fluidity Naomi had adopted. The lines between command and comradeship blurred. Decisions were now made as a collective, each voice valued, each person's insight woven into the tapestry of their shared mission. The collaborative work with the Eterans had proven fruitful. Naomi had been tasked with overseeing the development of new technologies that would allow both species to exist in harmony with the world they now shared. Eteran nature had its own wisdom, its own intricate balance, and now the human crew was learning to live alongside it, not as conquerors but as stewards. Through collaboration, humanity and Eteran civilization had taken the first steps toward creating something lasting, something that, Naomi believed, could be the beginning of an entirely new chapter for both races. Yet, as much as she had embraced the new way of life, Naomi could not forget her past. The struggle for identity, the weight of the Earth's expectations, had shaped her in ways she couldn't fully erase. Sometimes, late at night, she would find herself staring at the stars, contemplating what her life could have been if she hadn't made the decision to leave Earth. The familiar pangs of longing would creep into her heart, reminding her of the friends, the family, and the world she had left behind. But it wasn't regret that filled her thoughts, it was a quiet sense of gratitude. She had ventured beyond her comfort zone, taken risks she hadn't thought possible, and in doing so had discovered an entire universe of possibilities, both external and within herself. Naomi, Yothar's voice broke through her reverie, grounding her back into the present. He stood beside her, his presence as familiar as the river that had once transformed her. "You've been distant lately. What weighs on you?" Naomi turned to him, her eyes reflecting the quiet struggle within. "I keep wondering if I made the right choice, leaving everything behind. Sometimes I feel as though there's a part of me that's missing." Yothar's gaze softened, and for a moment, Naomi saw the centuries of wisdom in his eyes. The feeling of loss is natural. Change is often accompanied by grief, especially when what is lost is something deeply rooted in us. But you must understand this, Naomi. What you have gained is not in opposition to what you left behind. They are not mutually exclusive. Naomi felt the weight of his words. He was right. The woman she had been on Earth would never be the woman she was now. But that didn't mean the past had no place in her. It was part of her foundation, a part of the person she had become. She had not erased the Earth she had once known. She had simply redefined it in her own terms, woven it into the fabric of her new life. "I guess I never truly let go of Earth," Naomi admitted quietly. "I thought I had to completely disconnect from it to move forward. But maybe I've just outgrown it?" Yothar nodded. "Perhaps. But that does not mean you are lost, nor does it mean you must sever the ties you once held dear. You are not a fixed being, Naomi. You are the sum of all your experiences. Earth is part of you as much as Eteran 5 is. You are now a bridge between these worlds." Naomi smiled, the weight in her chest lightening. He was right. The transformation she had undergone had never been about erasing her past, but about integrating it into a larger, more fluid existence. She was no longer bound by the old constructs of identity. Instead, she was free to evolve, to be both Earthling and Eteran in her own unique way, creating a new version of herself with every step she took. As she stood there, feeling the gentle breeze on her face and hearing the soft murmur of the river nearby, Naomi realized that she had already become something more than she had ever imagined. She had become a bridge, not just between two worlds but between the many possibilities of who she could be. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sudden, familiar hum of the ship's engines. The crew was preparing for their next mission, and there was a renewed sense of purpose in the air. The humans and the Eterans, now united by shared goals and ideals, were ready to explore the stars together, with no barriers between them. What had once seemed impossible, a true partnership, was now becoming a reality. Naomi turned to Yothar, her eyes sparkling with the kind of clarity she had long sought. "I think it's time," she said. Time to leave behind the questions of who we were and focus on who we are becoming. Yothar smiled, his expression serene. Indeed. The journey ahead will not always be easy, but it is one worth taking. You have embraced the unknown, Naomi. Now it is time to walk boldly into it. With that, Naomi took a deep breath and looked to the horizon. There were still so many unknowns, so many worlds yet to be discovered, but she was ready. Ready to lead, ready to learn, and ready to face whatever came next. As the ship's engines roared to life, Naomi joined her crew. Together they would navigate the stars, not just as explorers of distant worlds, but as pioneers of a new way of being, bound not by old identities, but by the limitless potential of the future. And as they soared into the vastness of space, Naomi realized that the river was still flowing through her, forever carrying her forward, never stagnant, always evolving. The journey was endless, but that was the beauty of it. In the endless flow of life, there was always more to discover, and for the first time, Naomi was no longer afraid to see where it would take her. The end. Thanks for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more exciting HFY stories. Your support means the world to us. And make sure to tap the bell icon so you never miss an update. Stay tuned for our next adventure, and until then, keep exploring the stars. See you in the next video.